So grieving is not only grieving about people that we lose, right? It's grieving patterns. It's grieving our old selves. It's grieving all ways of behavior, right? And I think for me, it was all of that. I made a very clear decision that I was never going to settle again. And in order for me to do that, I had to let go of patterns that held me back from being the woman that I was committing to being, from being an empowered woman. I can't be an empowered woman and then settle at the same time. That doesn't go together.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. You are all in for a treat today. You will be listening to Adriana Sorgi. And Adriana is a mother of teenagers, spiritual entrepreneur, published author, as well as a relentless soul seeker. She is the author of Your Breakdown is Your Breakthrough and How to Reconnect with Your True Self and Live Your Life Unapologetically. And we will be talking about different aspects of grief, not related to death, but about changes and transitions in life and ending of chapters. So, welcome, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Kendra.
I am so happy to hear you. And by the
Uh,
way, she is from Colombia. So if you
mm,
guys by chance hear our accents or if we end up going into Spanish, we normally communicate in Spanish with each other, but we are
mhm.
doing this in English for the listeners because her book is in English and a lot of the people that follow her are English speakers on her social media. So I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for
Well,
having me.
okay, so tell us a
Mm,
little bit more about you. So I said you're
mhm,
from Colombia. So let's talk about that, when you came to the States and a
mhm.
little bit about your life and your upbringing.
Yeah. So I've been in the States for about almost 30 years. So since I graduated from high school, I moved to Los Angeles. I actually was an exchange student in Los Angeles in Northern California, not LA, but north of LA, for a year. And that's when I realized that this felt like home. So I went back to Colombia after my exchange student year, which I graduated as a senior in high school there. And when I went back, I was there for a year and a half, and then I thought, you know what, this I need to go back. That really feels more aligned with me, and I came back right before I turned 20, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
met in college. I remember actually when
yeah,
we met. I think we were in the computer room. I think that when we met, we might have been in the computer room. That's kind of
yeah.
what I remember. I was writing emails, back then there were no smartphones, but I think we met in the computer room. Um, so that's yeah, we met in Santa Monica College.
That's right. Yes. Uh huh.
And so we've known each other since, but we haven't seen each other in probably 20 years. We haven't seen
Yeah.
each other. It's
Oh my
been so
goodness, that's
yes.
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
probably because I've been married for 18
Uh
and
huh.
I left and it's probably been about 20 years
Oh,
since I've seen you.
probably even more.
More. Yeah. It's
Hmm.
crazy, huh?
Yeah.
But we've kept
But
in
it
touch.
it feels like we see each other all the time
Well,
through
social
social media.
media does
I
that,
know.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've talked and so forth. So
Yeah.
so it's not like we haven't seen each other, but it doesn't mean like we haven't
Yeah.
been connected. So I was so excited when you came out with your book and reading it. It got me to get to know you on these other levels. And of
Mm,
course, I knew a lot of like your story, and we had talked about different aspects of your story and your life because we were in college. But at the same time, I feel like back then in our early 20s, maybe the type of connections and the type of conversations maybe were not as like deep as
mm,
they are now, right? As we
mm,
start maturing and becoming more in alignment with who we are, we start opening up more. But I do remember there was a book you really liked back then that really struck me and really gave me and I don't know if you remember this part. You liked, I think it was Conversations with God. Does
mm.
that ring a
Oh,
bell for
wow.
you?
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
So
Yes.
I was like,
Mm,
wow, like it gave me that perspective that you did have
mm,
already these really deep and soulful type of
mm,
insights about you. And this is
mm,
in, we're here like in our early 20s and this
mhm,
young
mhm,
woman reading these really deep books
mm.
then. So I thought I'd read that.
Yeah.
Does that recall? Do you recall that?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think that I got on this journey of spiritual, I guess, seeking
Mm,
uh, early in my 20s. I was, I had a pretty tough childhood in Colombia. And when I moved back to the United States, I felt really lost.
mm,
Like when you met me, I was a very lost soul. I had no idea what I was doing with my life. I felt really sad inside. Nobody really could really see the degree of my sadness and um, confusion that I live with. And I started to gravitate towards spirituality back then. And I think it all started from meetings that I attended about bulimia. I was bulimic back then, and for about 15 years, since the age of 13 until right before, I think I wrote a little bit on the book until
mhm,
I got pregnant with my daughter. So during that time, I was married and I felt really confused with my life. There was a lot of things that I had. I lived a really expansive life, materially speaking. I had everything I wanted, but internally, I felt incredibly lost.
mm,
And so I started seeking, going deeper with myself, learning, reading, um, going to taking workshops, working with coaches. And little by little, I realized that there was so much more about me than just
mm,
being a mom, even though I love being a mom, yes, but I knew that there was a lot more. And so I began to explore more into this, path of spirituality, learning more about myself, learning about my capabilities in this lifetime, and that's how it all started to almost sort of like come together.
mm.
And by
Like pieces
understanding
of a
who
puzzle.
yeah
Pieces of a puzzle. Mm,
understanding who I really was,
mm,
and what I was able to do. But yeah, it all started back then in my 20s, but things kept happening. I
mhm.
kept, like almost like seeing the light and then not seeing it, seeing
It's like
it and not seeing it,
mm,
right? Like until my huge breakthrough, which was really my divorce. That was my biggest breakthrough. And that's how this book
okay.
came along. Yeah.
Wow, there's so much there. So let me go back and
Mm,
go into other aspects. I got chills and I started getting really moved because the fact that I knew you then and to know that you've been around a person that you wanted to be seen or was struggling with these things and maybe not knowing, makes me a little bit
mm,
sad that
mm,
I was around some you made me cry, that I wish I would have been um more aware of those kind of things, and it makes
yeah.
me feel like um being more aware even in my present day with my relationships of really truly listening. I know now I'm more intuitive of knowing when
Mm,
people are not like okay, but who knows if, like you even said, in our 20s we're still kind of discovering who we are, so that intuition sometimes we don't end up listening to it.
mhm, mhm,
um Regarding your upbringing and coming to the States and feeling lost, And then you mentioned very vulnerably about your bulimia. Which thank you, because that those I know a lot of parents that are struggling with those kind of situations with their children,
Hmm.
and so thank you for sharing that. Um, let's talk about the pressures of growing up, a little bit about that, and if with regarding your modeling career, did that
Hmm.
have anything to do with how you felt about yourself then, and was the ways of how you kind of broke out of that when you came to the States, was it part of that, of the upbringing being so let me put it, and I believe you touch on this on the book, but the expectations of what's expected of a woman, what's expected of a
Mm.
young woman, what are they expected to look, what are they
Mm.
expected to do, were those expectations what kind of made you feel the way you did?
Yeah, well, I think that is very important to mention that I grew up with a single mom. Eh, she, my father left when I was 13 years old, and I think I felt abandoned. I felt abandoned by my father because all of a sudden, once he was an amazing dad, and I used to play with him, and he would come home. That was like my biggest joy, after he came home from work and just hang out with my dad was the best. And one day he just left. And I knew that it was probably going to come down to that at some point, but I didn't know that it was going to happen so suddenly and without notice. And he just left and he had someone else. And my mom went absolutely nuts. She lost it. So living with a mom, and I love her to death, and of course we have healed and we have a great relationship now. But growing up with her, being in a state of confusion and grief, constant grief, anger, and feeling abandoned also by my dad was pretty heavy.
Mm,
And she had huge expectations on me because I was the older daughter. So I was pretty much like the one that had to keep it all together. She was
mm,
lost. She didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, her husband leaves. She has no money. He became really irresponsible. And we had nothing at that point. She had to find a job, not only one job, but two jobs. She worked one job in the morning, another job in the afternoon, and he was just living his life. He moved to the capital. He met this woman and they got married. And so I was like, what is going on
mm,
here? All of a sudden, my dad leaves, and I'm with this woman that has become a monster. Literally, she became like literally a monster. And I felt really abused by her, constantly abused by her, telling me that I was not pretty, that I was the reason why my dad left. And these are things that I can talk about today, 47
because
years
it's
old, and
healed, because
because
that
it's still,
relationship is already
yeah, and
healed,
it's
yeah.
not to
Mhm.
like put my mom down in any way, but these were all experiences that were the catalyst for me to begin to dig deeper into myself, to realize that everybody's doing the best they can. So she was doing the best she knew what to do with the tools that she had at the time, and she didn't know how to be a mom. She didn't even know how to work. She didn't have the tools to do any of that because one day she's married to this man that is maintaining her, and you know that in our culture, it's a very patriarchal culture.
Mhm.
So he never really encouraged her to be empowered and to find a job and to do something that made her happy. So she was just living off of whatever he was making, and then one day he leaves and her whole world turns around and breaks down.
And
So
with two
she,
two young daughters, 13,
right.
and your sister was how old at that
My
time?
sister was 7 years younger than me, so
Oh,
she was a baby. So I was the older daughter, and I had to keep
mhm,
it all together. And I was at a very young age, I realized that I had this inner strength that I didn't even understand, my power, but I knew that I had it. I knew that I was wise, that I would see things. I was very observant, and I knew that my mom was lost
mm,
early on. Like I just knew, wow, she's lost it,
mm.
and I need to survive now. So I was on survival mode every day with her. And that's how the bulimia started to happen. And it was because this constant criticism, my mom telling me every day that I didn't look good, that I had to lose weight, and I was so skinny already, that I didn't have this or that, and and so wanting to be accepted and loved by my mom became my goal, so to speak. That became my goal, and I was every day, like doing all the things that she wanted me to do, looking in, the ways that she wanted me to look in order to feel loved, to feel accepted
Mm.
by her. And so one of the things that pressure went towards, like this eating disorder, like gravitating towards the eating disorder, because that was like my hiding place. Yeah.
Mhm.
And from there, I think that I was on and off bulimic. I became anorexic, and the anorexia was got me into the hospital because I was dehydrated, and she didn't know what was happening with me. She didn't know that I wasn't eating. She thought
Mm.
that I was just depressed, that something was really wrong with me. And so she put me with a psychotherapist, to work with a psychotherapist, and then the psychotherapist, he told my mom that I had to go to the hospital to get some fluids because I was going to die. And
Wow.
so I was
And
just
you were how old at this point when you were
I
put into
was
the
I was
hospital?
probably 11. I was no, my dad had
Oh,
just left, so I was
oh,
probably like almost 13. I was almost
oh, okay.
13. And then but I think going back to the grief, I think it was just this grief that I
Yeah.
felt. That I was just grieving immensely, and people didn't understand that that was happening to
Mhm.
me. So instead of like really, I didn't really have that support. And I think back then, and in that culture, it was talking about these things was just, I mean, it
No,
was,
no,
it,
no,
it,
no, you
it
don't
was
do
not
yeah, you don't
possible.
go to no,
It
you
was
just
not
you talk
possible.
about surface stuff. You talk about over the, surface stuff. Something came up right now as you're saying this of the grief. Also, you mentioned you felt that your dad had left as if you had been abandoned. So maybe like not being deserving of love and wondering if that connection with the grief of the food in that moment, you know what I
Well,
mean?
I,
Like,
I think I think that my deepest connection to myself came through the food, like eating
mhm,
food and then throwing up. Like that was
mhm,
my hiding place. And I felt like those were the moments in which I felt the most connected to myself, because
mm,
I could really grieve through that. I could really, feel my anger, feel my sadness, feel my desperation, and I would just hide in the bathroom, do all of that, then cry, sob, and go back into the world, like nothing
mm.
had happened. So
Like a
I
release. It was a
yeah,
release.
it
It
was
was
a
like a
release. It
physical
was like
release from
like
what you
how
were feeling.
exactly,
Ah,
like I just
sheesh.
felt this incredible sadness inside of me that nobody could understand. I just wanted to scream and say, I miss my dad.
Mm,
Bring him back. I need him, you know?
mm,
And because I couldn't do that, because my mom would judge me, she didn't want me to feel any sadness about him because she was angry. So if I said I miss my dad, she would get mad, because he was, like she would bad mouth him. He's a horrible man. He left me for another woman. He is not worthy of having you guys in his life. So I was here, a child, trying to understand A, why he left me, and B, why I'm not even allowed to say that
allowed.
I miss him, you know?
Mhm,
So I turned to bulimia because that was my place to feel my pain. That was the
mm,
only place where I was really allowed to feel all my feelings.
mm. Oh,
And
I
I
just
lived
think
with that for so long, for so long. It was about until I had my daughter, until I was pregnant with my daughter, feeling this sadness that I was not able to process with anyone until I
mm,
started my inner work, working, with other coaches and people here in the United States.
in the States.
Yeah.
Now, you dedicate this book to your daughter,
Mm,
and very it's now I see in the book I know the
mm,
why, but even as you're talking here, it's even more clear. Like
Yeah.
you mentioned, she saved your life. So her being pregnant with her
Mm.
saved your life. Do you feel that way?
Yes, because, and I want people to understand this when I say, I think I start my book with a little quote that says, Camila, you are the life that gave me life again.
Mhm.
And that is true because um, you having done this work also understand that when we don't heal our patterns, we repeat them.
Mhm.
And so when I got married, it felt to me like it was everything was so familiar. My
Mhm.
ex-husband felt so familiar. You know, he
Mhm.
was also very emotionally abusive, not physically but emotionally. And he reminded me a lot of the way that I grew up with my parents, you know, a little bit of my mom, a little bit of my dad, in in that sense, and in the, you know, abusive
Mhm.
sense. And so I was miserable. I didn't feel happy in that marriage. But I chose him because he was familiar to me, because he hit home, you know, he felt like home.
Mhm.
And when I got pregnant of Camila, she was very desired. She was wanted by both of us. She was very loved. We wanted a child. That was clear. Um, but in the beginning of my pregnancy, I was still struggling with my disease.
Mhm.
And I had my little belly and I kept binging and throwing up. And I thought that getting pregnant was going to take that away. You know, I thought if I have a child, that's going to heal me. You know, little did I know it was not going to be like that. It was not just going to happen like that. I was going to have to make a decision, and that decision was going to be about saving my child. But saving her was going to save me. So that day, and I think it's in one of the chapters of the book, I had that experience that I was going through one of my, you know,
Episodes, episodes. Mhm.
episodes, and I was in the bathroom, and it was really heavy. I was with my head on the toilet, and I was throwing up for about, I don't know, half an hour. And then something really hit me, and I stood up, and I just felt this inner light, and I just started to get like very tingly, and I got up and I looked in the mirror, and my face was red, you know, because I was doing this.
Mhm.
And I stood up and I looked at myself, and I just felt this voice inside me that said, how much longer? How much longer? Do it for her. And I started sobbing, Kendra. I just got on the floor on my knees in agony. And I asked God, I said, help me. I can't do this alone. I need to do this for my child. I want her to be healthy. And in order for her to be healthy, I need to be healthy. And in that moment, I just knew, you know, I just had that inner knowing that it was going to stop right then and there.
That
I
clarity.
felt it, that
Now with
clarity.
that,
Yeah.
did you get then support then from groups at that moment? How were you able to
I didn't
achieve
need
that?
it.
Or was it a complete just decision?
It was a decision.
A decision and then this
It was
extra
a,
support from a spiritual
I
support?
had been going to groups. I had already been going to
Wow.
groups, and I felt really lost in those groups. Something was missing. I wasn't ready to make a decision. That's what
Mm,
was missing. I
mm,
wasn't ready to really decide with mind, body, and soul. And in that moment, I knew that I was making a decision, and that decision was going to be the catalyst for me to get to the other side. And
mm,
it happened. I stood up, I washed my face, I washed the toilet like I always did. But something was different when I came out of the bathroom. I had already made a decision, and I was clear,
mm.
and I was going to save my child, and I was going to save me, and I was going to become the woman that I really, really am. And
Mm.
in that moment, my life changed.
Ugh.
So my girl is such a blessing. She's a blessing in my life, huge blessing.
Mm.
I knew I had to start my book with that, because I that book I wrote it because of her.
Mm.
Every I think that becoming an empowered woman has been for me, walking that path has been an example for her. I couldn't teach my daughter to be an empowered woman if I'm not being that myself. And that's, yeah. So
Wow.
that's, anyway, that's part of it.
That
Yeah.
that is one of the many, oh my gosh, thank you for going deep into that part, because I know that so many will relate to this
Mm,
aspect, so many of the listeners, and thank you for sharing that, of how many decisions people make, whether in your case it had to do with the eating disorder, but in other people it could be for other aspects of life, of making those choices. Maybe in that moment they're not in a right place or with the right person in their life, and they make a decision to change for their children, or they're in other type of addictions or things like that, that they may have it to make a decision, so a lot of different moments in this junction as you're becoming a parent, that you have this choice of what it is you're going to do in order to be that example. And what you said right now is so powerful. It's like, how am I going to teach my child to be empowered if I'm not empowered myself?
right.
So that
Yeah.
is just so, 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 so powerful. Let's go into the aspects now of relationships, then the divorce, and then from there on with the relationships, because you are an expert at this, and at helping people really be able to find themselves in order to be able to attract as well their loved one at the right time, because they have
Mm,
to be the right person to be
yeah.
attracting the right person. So
Mm,
go into that, and as well in that, if you want to weave in how you discovered spiritual psychology, and all of the work that you do there, however you want to navigate this next chapter of
yeah.
this conversation.
Well, I think that the hardest things for me in my adult life was relationships, romantic relationships with men, right? I wanted it so badly, and every single one of them would become highly dysfunctional at some point, and it was like that dysfunction that I was so used to, that at some point, like, everything would start so beautiful, and they wanted to be with me, and they wanted to commit to this relationship. But then at some point, there was this threat, like this pattern. I would lose myself in the relationship. And I think I began to reflect about that right after my divorce, because I got into another relationship and it started to look like my marriage at some point. And then that relationship ended, and I got into another one very quickly. I wasn't single for very long. I wanted to be with someone. I was very afraid of being alone. I was very afraid of myself, of my relationship with myself. I didn't know what that looked like. And I think that I did have that inner wisdom and inner strength, but it was very, very deep inside me. I didn't even know how to get to it. I knew that I was powerful. Like, interestingly enough, I did know that I was pretty powerful woman, but I didn't know how to touch to that yet. And so I think that I was hiding behind my relationships, because with powerful men, like, I was attracted to very powerful men. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to be a powerful woman next to them. So I would begin to lose myself in those relationships. And then I think the one relationship with this man that I think, the second one right after my
Mm-hmm.
divorce, there was
The one you
one.
mentioned in the chapter for grief, is this the
Yes,
4-year
that's the one.
relationship? Yeah,
That's the one.
this is the
I
one that
was
you mentioned. Yeah.
I was with this man for 4 years, and he was incredible in so many ways. Like, I just get it now, looking back, how I really needed to be with this man for so many reasons. He needed to slap me awake. And I think that's what happened after the first 3 years of that relationship. Things became so intolerable, so unbearable to me, because I lost myself so deep into it, that my school, that the school that I went to for spiritual psychology, came into the third year of that relationship. And I started to seek into more into that, because things were so similar to the way that I grew up with my parents, and to the way that things were in my marriage with him. And
Mm.
that's when I began to reflect deeper. What is it about me that I continue to do, that I attract these patterns and this type of behaviors, and again,
Mhm.
in this relationship? So I became very curious about it. And I think that when we're ready to heal, teachers appear and
Mm.
opportunities show up. So I met this woman in my martial arts class. I was in a martial arts class, and I met this woman, and she was really, I think, uh, uh, what would be the word? I think she was very
Instrumental? Is that the
instrumental
word?
for me.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. She was
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
instrumental.
I
No,
was seeing you. I'm like, okay, could it be this
because
word? I didn't mean to do that.
I really wanted to,
To
I
get the
really
right
wanted to
word.
tap into that, because that is exactly the word. She was
Mhm.
instrumental for me on this transformation.
Mm.
And I think that she was the one that led me to the school. And there was I talked to her one day, and she said, look, I think there is an information evening tonight, why don't you go check it out? And I was so ready at that point. I was still in the relationship, but I was struggling, and I knew that if I didn't do something, that I was probably going to settle for less than I wanted, because I didn't want to be alone. And my kids were so little, and I was terrified of being alone. And he helped me so much with my kids. So I didn't know how to let go of him, but I knew that I was, if I ended up with him, that things were going to be again the
The
same.
same, the cycle. Mhm.
Yeah, same cycle. So I ended up going to this school that night, that evening. And the minute I walked into it, was again, I felt the same feeling that I felt when I was in the bathroom with my head on the
Oh.
toilet. It was the
Oh.
same. And I
A
just knew it.
knowing, like
It
a
was that
knowing.
knowing,
Mhm.
that inner knowing. I walked into that classroom, and I saw these people, and I just felt it again.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, there is something here. So I sat down and I listened to the introduction. And by the time that it was 2 hours, a 2 hour introduction. And at the end of it, I went towards the back of the room and I signed up.
Mhm.
I paid for it. I paid for the 2 years. And people were paying monthly. I didn't pay monthly. I paid for two
You were
years.
committed. You
I
were
committed.
committed.
I knew that if I
Mm.
paid for the whole program, I was going to do it.
Oof.
So I made a decision, because I had the money in the bank. And I thought, if I pay monthly, that's not a commitment, because I can get out of it whenever I want.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I am going to do it right now, because I'm sending this message, I'm putting this message out into the universe, that I'm doing this. That
Mm.
no matter what, I'm going to finish this, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much is going to trigger me inside, no matter how much is going to bring out to the surface, but I'm doing this.
Mm.
And so I did it. And I didn't ask for permission to anyone. And when I got home, I had to assume the consequences of this, because the boyfriend that I was with was furious. That brought up a lot for him.
Wow.
It brought up a lot into, a
Because you were
relationship.
empowered in that moment, you really showed your
Yeah.
empowerment.
Well,
And
and
so
the
somebody seeing that
is
empowered you. Yes.
it triggered him
Yes.
inside, because he felt very insecure. Oh, well, who is she going to
Mhm.
become now? Right. and
Mhm.
and I said, I'm doing this, and that's what was going to take time away from from us, from being together, because I was going to have to study. I was going to have to get together with, other students. I was going to have to go to the school in person once a month for the whole weekend. So that brought up a lot, but that became, to me, I think that's been one of the biggest um, commitments that I've made in my life, was going through that process for 2 years. And after I graduated, I was a different woman. I was a different woman. I had already left him. It was probably like into year one of the school that I decided, that I became very clear that that relationship wasn't for me. So I ended it. And that's how I experienced the most incredible, incredible grief with love that I've
I, that,
ever, that I could have never imagined. To grieve like that was just exquisite. It
oh
was
my,
so beautiful.
that word exquisite, to listen to that aspect of grieving with love being
Mm,
exquisite. That is such a beautiful way of saying it, and at the same time it seems as if it's contradictory, right?
mm,
Like
mm,
how would it be exquisite to grieve, but at the same time,
mm.
because of the way that you grieved with love and what it uncovered within you and allowed you to express and grow, that's where that exquisiteness comes from. Is that how you
Exactly.
feel it?
Absolutely. Because we only grieve because we love. We love so much.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we wouldn't grieve. The more we love, the more we grieve. And I love that man deeply, even though it was dysfunctional. But he was, for me, an incredible teacher. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have gone to that school. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have realized how powerful it really was. And even if the relationship became impossible towards the end, he was really the person that helped me to wake up to life, to wake up to who I really am.
Mm.
So I think that I mentioned a little bit the way that I grieved in in the book, and I think that I made a conscious decision that I was going to leave the relationship, and that even if I felt pain throughout that process, I was not going to get back with him. And that was another commitment that I made to myself.
That was your other paying in full the amount
It
again,
was
like it
like,
was clear.
it's done. Like that, like I'm breaking up this relationship right
Mhm.
now. And no matter what I go through during the grief period, I would not get back with this person. This is done. This is complete. This is
Mm.
part of my past. And so I decided that that process, I was going to do it gently. I was going to be loving with myself. And so that became my grief. My grief became falling in love with myself, falling in love with every single feeling that was coming up to the surface. And that's what I did. Every time that I was feeling pain, I just loved the pain. I
Mm.
embraced it. It would come up to the surface. I would look at it and I befriended it. I looked at my pain as my best friend in the moment. And it was every day for 6 months, Kendra. It would come up. I was in the kitchen, and I mentioned the kitchen because it was it was our special place, because he loved to cook. So we would be in the kitchen every day cooking some. He was an amazing cook. So we would be in the kitchen, and I was helping out, and he was cooking, and then I would wash the dishes while he was doing something else. And I always remember him in the
In the
kitchen.
kitchen. Mm.
So I was in the kitchen cooking for my children, and the grief would just come along, and I could just feel it. It was like right around 5 in the afternoon. I was prepping for dinner, and boom, all the feelings would start to come up to the surface, and I could just feel them one by one, just coming up, coming up, coming up. And I will just start talking to them. I will talk to
Mm.
them like, okay, there you are. You're coming. I can feel you. What do you need me to do for you? And then whatever follow, that's what I would do. Crying, sobbing, hitting a pillow, going for a walk. I just listened. I just listened. And I was just being guided by my own feelings. Do this, do that, right. Go for a walk, sob, whatever I needed to do, I did. And so I didn't have to get back into the story because I was
Mm.
just listening to my feelings and just doing what they needed me to do. Instead of going to the story, oh, but I should have done this, oh, but he did that, oh, but maybe this, but maybe I could have done this better, oh, but he was so good to me, and why did, no, there was no story. I let go of the story and I just felt deeply.
Mm. Mm.
And that just became the most incredible process. And it was this grieving with pleasure. And I know it sounds kind of contradicted,
Mhm, mhm.
right? To what grief really most people think it is. But I chose to make grief an exquisite experience for me.
Wow. The aspect of you connecting to all these emotions, do you feel that that is one of the times in your life in which you maybe at the up to that point had really, really felt the most connected to who you were?
Mm,
Is that why you felt it was so exquisite? Because you were finally seeing you?
yeah,
Mm.
yes, I think so. Because through all my feelings and no story, I was able to really feel my heart, to really feel what my heart contained in the inside, my emotions, my joy, my pain, my anger, my disappointment, my regret, my grief. So all of those emotions are part of the, inside of the grief.
Mm.
And through that, I was able to feel who I was, which is my heart.
Mm.
And by just listening to what my heart wanted me to do, was able to heal each one of them, like each one of those wounds, slowly, gradually, giving it the time that it really needed, that it really deserved. And it
Mm.
took me
Mm.
about 6 months. Every day was a different one. It's like one day maybe I would be so angry and I had to like just go for a power walk in the middle of the afternoon and just tell my kids I'll be right back. I just need to go
Mm.
for a walk. Or maybe I needed to just lock myself in my bedroom and cry on my pillow. Or maybe I needed to write it down. Yeah, but
Mhm.
I was like on command, whatever my heart wanted me to do, I was doing. Do this now, I need you to do that, boom. And I was there
Mm.
listening and being guided.
Very
And that
beautiful,
that
so
was that was
intuitive.
just that was just so beautiful. It was so beautiful. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Now, from that point on, there's something I want to say from the book, if it's okay if I read this
Sure.
part two of grieving that relationship. It was not that you were just grieving him, but you were also letting go of old patterns that didn't serve you.
Yeah.
So you were that end of a relationship is also the end of this other Adriana
Yes.
Sorgi. It
Yes.
was the end of that person. So there could have been an aspect of grief of I am leaving her behind and I will no longer succumb to those patterns and I do have to be okay with this new me. The new
Yeah.
me of actually being also okay of being alone. I'm
Yeah.
going to choose to be alone for a period of time and not go back into another relationship
Yes.
right away
Yes.
either. So let's talk about that um
Hmm.
a little too, if you
Yeah.
don't
So
mind.
so grieving is not only it's not only grieving about people that we
Mhm,
lose, right? It's grieving
mhm,
patterns. It's grieving our old selves. It's grieving all ways of behavior, right?
mhm,
And I think for me it was all of that. I made a very clear decision that I was never going to settle again. And in order for me to do that, I had to let go of patterns that held me back from being the woman that I was committing to being from being an empowered woman. I can't be an empowered woman and then and settle at the same time. That doesn't go together, right? So I had to grieve my old self, and that felt really sad. I mean,
Mhm.
because I didn't know yet what that was going to look like. So it's like I was saying goodbye to the woman that served me. And I
Mhm.
say this because she served me for so long, you
Mhm.
know,
She
being
kept
this,
you safe, quote
right?
unquote,
She kept
safe.
me
She kept
safe.
you financially safe. She kept you
Exactly.
in a way in which you could show up to the world like with this man on your side, secure
Exactly.
in many other
I
aspects.
didn't have to be vulnerable. I didn't have to
Mhm.
show up. I didn't
Mhm.
have to be, I didn't have to try to do anything, you know. So she kept me safe for a long time. She served me while I wasn't ready to do that.
Mhm.
So I had to say goodbye to her. And that hurt. That felt really scary. That felt really scary because I didn't know who I was without her yet.
Mm.
So saying goodbye to my old self was part of my grief. And
Mm.
also, a lot of the stuff that happened with my parents was coming up to the surface because it was all the things that I never really processed with anyone. The abandonment that I felt when my father walked out, the abuse that I felt, and the lack of acceptance that I felt from my mom, all of that came up to the surface also during that period. And so it was not only about this man, it was about my past, it was about my parents, it was about my old patterns. So I took advantage of that process and I just brought it all up and I said, okay, well, I might as well. I might as well process all of this while
Let's
I,
just unpack it.
yeah,
Let's just unpack it, deal with
exactly.
it
Yeah.
so that it doesn't keep on showing up. And it's so hard, right? Because it's like when you get back from a trip, you really do want just to leave the suitcase packed most of the
Yeah.
time, right? It's like, but if you just don't just unpack it all and deal with it and see what it, so
I
that
know, but
that's kind of that.
and I love that you said that because I remember that when I was in my spiritual psychology class, the teacher said used to say that we're walking with this backpack full of rocks, right? And we keep accumulating rocks, and the backpack
Mm,
keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier until we collapse because
mm,
it's so heavy that we can't carry it anymore. So we just fall down. And that's what happened with me with this man. The backpack
mm.
got really heavy and I
He was that
collapsed.
last rock. He was
He
just that last rock
he
right
was
there.
perfect. He was perfect for me.
Yes.
You know, it's like it, everything that I experienced with him is like got me to that edge, you know, where I just had to I couldn't stay on the edge anymore. I was like, okay,
Mhm,
I'm either on this side or that side. And the other side of the fence, there was myself. And I had to
mhm,
choose between my patterns and myself and my real
mhm,
self. And I chose me. And that was gonna, I knew that was gonna hurt. I knew that was gonna feel uncomfortable. I knew that was going to feel excruciating. I knew it, but I was ready. I was ready.
mm,
And you and I know that not everybody wants to experience this, even if they
mhm,
know it.
mhm.
Even if they know that on the other side of the fence, there might be a much better world. There might be a much better way of living.
Yes.
But it's, you know, it there are
It's
some,
hard.
yeah, there
Yeah.
are some requirements in order for you to get there, right? Like you got to go through a lot before you get
Yes.
there. And not everybody wants to do it. So I
No.
thought, you know what? I'm in it. I'm ready to do it. I don't want to live like this. And I have a girl. I have a son too, right? But I have a daughter, you know, and
Mhm,
it's a girl. And I gotta walk my path in order to show her what that really means to be an
mm.
empowered woman that doesn't settle for less than what she wants.
But the example you're giving your son as well, that empowered women so that if by chance, like in relationships or so forth like that, and for him in the future or whatever their dynamics will look like, he can see what an empowered woman looks like and does not fear that either. So it's the
Yes.
example that you give your daughter to be empowered in who she is, and the example you give your son that empowered women are incredibly amazing because he's seen it in his own mom.
Yeah.
So it's a huge gift that you are giving them. Um my God, I could probably talk for a whole other hour asking you questions because because I'm like, it is just so we could go so much deeper into so many different aspects of this conversation. But you do have to go because aside from spiritual psychology, you're also an instructor, a fitness instructor, and help women and so forth. So let's talk about this, Adriana, now and everything that you are doing aside from this amazing book. And again, the name of the book from Adriana Sorgi is Your Breakdown is Your Breakthrough. And if what you guys have heard does not give you a glimpse of exactly what that means,
Mm.
I mean, we've already talked about two different types of breakdowns being really those breakthroughs of uncovering. So let's talk about the now and how it is you're helping and empowering other women as well, as, of course, your children as well, but empowering others and how they can find your book and all these kind of things. So let's go
Yeah.
there.
So ever since I began my coaching practice, which was right after I graduated from the University of Santa Monica on spiritual psychology, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to, my purpose in this lifetime was to empower women to really become who they are and to own everything about themselves, everything without apology. And I began my coaching practice, and it's been a journey that I adore. I absolutely love what I do. Not only, and yes, you just mentioned that I'm a fitness trainer because I think that goes together, right? Like when we
Mhm.
feel amazing in the inside, then it reflects out in the outside.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we want to take care of ourselves. We want to look better for us, right? Just because that makes us feel good and
Mhm.
empowered. The Adriana that I am now is, God, it's completely different from who I was when I first began my inner journey, and that I kind of lost my train of thought. Uh,
No, you were talking about what you're doing now. So empowering women.
yeah,
You're fine. You're fine. You're
yeah.
still in the thought.
Let's see. So that's what I'm doing. I think that the area that I love the most is the area of relationship. I love empowering women in the area of relationship and uh, finding love, finding love, and becoming aware of what it is that is holding them back from being available
Mm.
to having that wonderful relationship that they want, and how to own it, how to really own it. Because I think that most of today in today's society, a lot of women, they want to be really empowered, and they think that being empowered means, well, I don't need a man, I don't need a man, I don't need to have a relationship, I can just do all these things, and realizing that they can really do all these things, right? But it's really holding them back from being available to love, because yeah, they don't need it, we don't need a man, but we want it, and it's okay to want it. We want to have a relationship. Yeah, some of them may not want it, that is legit, they might not want it, but there's a lot of women that do want it, but they are afraid to say it. So like just being okay with just owning that, owning the fact that I want a relationship, I desire that, I want to feel taken care of. And when I mean taken care of, doesn't mean that taken care of, financially speaking. And that could be, if you're listening to, a lot of, women may want that. And that's okay. It's okay to own that too, right? But to own it from a place of a love. I
Mm.
desire that. I'm worthy of that. I want that. There is nothing wrong with that.
From a place of abundance rather than a place of lack. So
Yes.
the moment you realize how abundant and how worthy you are, then the owning that you may want more XYZ, or of this person being with you because of XYZ, whether
Mm,
that be financial, this or that, if it's not coming from a place of lack and but a place of worth and that how much abundance you are, then it's different energy, right? Would
absolutely.
you, yeah.
Absolutely, it's a completely different energy because you have to realize that we come from an abundant universe, right? So if we come from an abundant universe, that means that we are abundant. We are
Mhm.
allowed to have whatever we want, but it is our shame, it is our judgments, it is our limiting beliefs that hold us back from having access to everything that
Mhm.
we want, because we make it mean something about ourselves, something wrong. Or if I dare to say that I want this, what are people going to think? Or how
Mm.
am I going to be perceived? Or right? So it's
Mhm.
like letting go of that. Because
Of the
when we
story. Let go of
of
the
the store,
story
when we
once
come
again.
from a place
Mhm.
of I am worthy of this. If other
Mhm.
people can have it, why can I not? So to me, that has become my journey, my commitment, my purpose, to put this message out there. You are allowed to have anything you want, anything you want. You are allowed to write a book. You
Yes.
are allowed to publish a book. Like
Self-publish it
you
if
don't
you
have
yeah.
to be a celebrity. You don't have to be a famous person in order to publish a book. You see, because I didn't publish this book to become a millionaire. I mean, if that happens, that would be a bonus, right? But for me, it was because
Mhm.
I felt connected to it, because I felt like I can. I can and I
Mm.
want to, and that feels aligned, and I'm gonna do it. And the people that resonates with that message will follow me and will benefit from it. And the people that don't, then they don't, and that's totally okay. I'm okay with
Mhm.
that. You see, but I felt that inner um, purpose. I need to
Yes.
write that book for me, first for
Mhm.
me. And if you resonate with that and it serves you, fantastic. So that has become my life. And I'm walking that path right now. What I want to do, I do it. I'm not afraid anymore. I don't ask
Mm.
permission anymore. And I tell my story freely. I am not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed to say that I was bulimic, that I was, that I had my head in the toilet for 15 plus years, like abusing myself, because that's what I learned, right? And I'm not embarrassed, because that to me was really the catalyst to become the woman that I am today. So I think that's my message. That is the message that I want to put out there. Your past has nothing to do with the woman that you are today or the woman that you want to become. Your past is part of your journey, and your past is your teacher. So to me, everything that happened to me didn't happen because God was against me or because my parents didn't love me. That happens just because it was my karma. I needed to go through that in order to realize my value, in order to realize how powerful I am and how much I can do. I used to feel a victim of my past for years. And where did that get me? Nowhere. I continue to stay a victim. And I knew that if I kept looking at my parents as my biggest, um, what would be a word? Abusers, and I was not going to get out of that dynamic. I
Mm.
was going to continue to manifest people like that wanted to
Mhm.
hurt me, right? I healed with love by seeing them as human beings that were doing the best they knew how to do, and they really loved me the best they knew how to love me.
Mm. Oh, it's so empowering to hear these words and what you're sharing about owning your story and not feeling shame around your story actually like reminds me of really how there's so much strength and vulnerability, right? There's so much strength in that, and we live in society that sometimes does not see vulnerability as strong, as being strong.
Mm.
They see it as a weakness, and it's not that case. When we're vulnerable and we're true to that and we own it, there's so much more strength than when we hide it.
Because we become relatable. We
Yes.
become relatable to the people that have gone through things that we've gone through, right? So
Mhm.
if I show up in this, putting myself in a platform above, all the people that I'm trying to coach or teach,
Mhm.
they're not going to relate to me. They're going to see me as, oh, this perfect coach. She's got it all together. And they're not going
Mhm.
to share with me, to open up with me, because they're going to think that I'm going to judge them, or that,
Mm.
I have it all together. What, they're going to feel
How would she
ashamed,
understand?
right?
How would she understand what I'm going
But
through?
the
Yeah, like
minute
what
that
you
I
said.
open up
Mhm.
to my clients, that I share with them what I've gone through and why I do what I do now, based on what I lived in the
Mhm.
past, they open up with me. That in
Mhm.
that second, they're like, oh, okay. Then all of a sudden,
Mhm.
they feel safe with me. They
Mm.
open up and they share what they are really struggling with, and
Mhm.
that to me is the gift. That is the
Give
gift right
permission.
there.
Yeah, you give permission to others to feel that way. And you also show what's possible
Right.
as well in that story as you're
Exactly.
sharing that. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
you show what's possible. Adriana, it's been
Mm.
amazing chatting with you. So many nuggets. So many times I teared up in this conversation. And I know that the listeners will get so much out of this conversation as well as from your book. So let's tell them how to find you. We'll put the links on the bottom, but if you want to share your website and also how they can get their hands on the book, as well as all you share so much also on your Instagram. So either they could coach with you directly as well, and you do one-on-one coaching. So please share that with our audience before we wrap.
Yeah. So the book is available on Amazon right now. It's called Your Breakdown is Your Breakthrough. And you can find me. I have a website. It's adrianasorgi.com. You can find me there. There's a lot of nuggets also on my website. I write a lot of articles. You can take advantage of reading those. Also, I do a lot of posting also on Instagram. I post about my fitness a lot, and I post about my coaching. And yeah, so those are, and you can also email me at adrianasorgi@gmail.com. Um, yes,
It's perfect. Perfect.
that's it.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much,
Oh, thank
Adriana.
you.
And it was just a pleasure. And I look forward to having you on again at another point. We could probably dive deeper into another subject of grief or just other aspects that people kind of struggle with in their life. So thank you once again, my friend.
Thank you so much, Kendra. So much. Much love to you.
Same. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.